See thy God, behold, behold, in heart and thou hast. Let the faithful guide the way. Do not fear, fear the darkened path when you walk alone. Burden not your own. On the darkest trail, you will see
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. How are we all? Can everybody hear me? Can everybody see the screen? Is everything coming across as it is supposed to? I'll give you a second for the lag to catch up there. We are back again. Regrettably, last week Avery was a little bit sick. He is fully recovered. He was given plenty of cuddles. He has now turned all the blankets on the bed into a fort, and he is having a grand old time lying there, just sitting, enjoying his fort. So housekeeping stuff real quick before we get going. This is probably going to be the thing. The stream will be Sunday nights, 9:30 Mountain Time. You may convert that into your local time as 9:30 p.m. Mountain Time, 21:30 for all of you foreign-born people. It's unlikely at this point that Hetman, with his job, is going to be joining us for streams that much often anymore. He's not big to begin with on public speaking, which can be tricky for a historian. He is full steam ahead on our slate of prepared content, which is proceeding apace, being worked on in the middle of the week when the Wednesday show normally would be occurring. But I think we are, for consistency's sake, going to stick to Sundays. With that said, hi, how are you? I've been recovering pretty well, all things considered. Getting my strength back, getting back into the swing of things, getting past that 5-pound lift restriction. That was a bitch. Just taking my time, not really worrying too much about the state of, well, any of the rest of things. Just getting things going. But I think it's time to get going again. Get a little bit more work done. And there's been so much stuff that's happened. You might think tonight what we're talking about is Donald Trump going, oh yeah, we killed free speech about flag burning. No. I don't think I want to talk about that because, first of all, it's not terribly remarkable. Donald Trump says a whole bunch of bullshit all the time, and most of it's just bullshit. However, I do think we need to talk about the concept of free speech and how it interacts with us and how we've killed it. Like, it doesn't really exist anymore. And I said I would talk a little bit about John Stuart Mill and On Liberty. And On Liberty is the writings in which John Stuart Mill, who was a 19th century English philosopher, advanced what he thought personal liberty was for. And in a word, he believes it's the idea that you need personal liberty in order to advance yourself as a person and therefore to advance society. And he writes fairly explicitly on these things, and he basically argues among a number of things, but one of the more enduring arguments that you find from John Stuart Mill is the harm principle. And essentially, what he argues is that the only legitimate reason for society to interfere with an individual's liberty of action is to prevent harm to others. So, John Stuart Mill was fairly significantly on the side of you being able to do whatever the hell you want, and as long as you were not harming people. So, if you wanted to drink yourself into a stupor, John Stuart Mill is like, go for it. If you wanted to, for example, sell yourself into slavery, he was far less interested in that. Kind of arguing that you, despite the fact that it is a self-executing action, that this is destroying any prospect of future progress and liberty, and therefore cannot be a thing you can do. He would also, for example, not feel terribly great about you running through the hills screaming, swinging axes at anyone you meet. Not a big thing for John Stuart Mill. I'm not going to read On Liberty tonight. We're already going to be taking up enough time talking about certain other things. You can. It's online. It's free. It's old. And it's not precisely that John Stuart Mill is the first person to talk about a concept of freedom of speech. But he is probably the philosopher that most people in the United States turn to if they turn to philosophy to try to justify what freedom of speech means. And he argues for a robust freedom of speech for a number of reasons. There's three big ones. The biggest, I think, is a the first one is his argument that people are prone to error, and that if we silence an opinion, that opinion might be correct. And this is, on the surface of it, fair, right? All silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. And we should not assume we are infallible because we are error prone. We are fallible. We cannot assume with any kind of certainty that something is absolutely certain. And for Mill, this idea that we can be wrong is essential to human flourishing and human progress. And this is why he believes that this sense of liberty is so important. And on the surface of that, it seems like a fairly useful idea. But he also argues that we should tolerate arguments we know are false. And Mill argues that this has value, and this is one of the things that I think we have found challenged in our time, very significantly, because he also argues that falsehoods improve our understanding of the truth. And this builds a fairly significant assumption into Mill's idea here, that you are seeking truth. One of the problems we have today in our discourse is that It's very easy to get up and say a thing and say it to thousands of people, and it can be absolutely untrue. And those people will take it and they will hold it to their heart because it gives them validation. And they will repeat it over and over and over again until it becomes the axiom by which they act. And you know this. We talk about the Overton window, right? That idea of what is acceptable discussion. And if you say and repeat a thing over and over and over again, you can see the Overton window moving. You see Republicans do this a lot these days. They talk about things like the Russia hoax and the January 6th hoax, and they keep trying to pin down these ideas as hoaxes instead of something real that happened, that we have evidence for, and in a certain way to make it unacceptable to say that those things were real in the first place. And perhaps falsehoods do have value for people seeking truth, but you don't have to seek truth. John Stuart Mill is born in the early 1800s, and he obviously didn't exist during the time of the internet. In fact, it took some time for talk to occur for Mill. He could write a letter to somebody, wait several days, and get a letter back. The volume of communication happening and the volume of lies and falsehoods being spread, and the volume of offensive speech being spread, all things that Mill thinks should be allowed, offensive speech and falsehoods, is happening like never before, and people are free to act on it, and they're never ever going to be held to account. Because there is no real sense of punishment for hypocrisy or for lies. And you can get away with quite a lot of bullshit we've learned with Russia, for example, and Ukraine, by simply pretending the thing isn't a problem. Or now Trump, pretending that the economy isn't crashing, or that he's not taking instructions from right-wing bloggers. And so we're at a point where things that we have argued vehemently to allow because we believe they could have value in human flourishing are precisely those things that have become too harmful for human flourishing to occur. And you can now listen to whatever message you want and retreat into whatever silo you want and get all the news you want to hear without ever having to engage with the other side. And at no point will you be called to account for it. And in fact, you are perversely incentivized to do so. So let's, I think, start here on a video from, you've seen this poor man standing in front of me. Anders Puck Nielsen is a Dutch military analyst. I believe he's Dutch. He sounds Dutch. Who does videos on topical current events in this Russia-Ukraine war. This is a video from his about 2 years ago, I think. What is hybrid warfare or liminal warfare? A theory being advanced by Professor David Kikulen. And I want to play this video, and I'm going to talk parts of it, but I want you to start to understand. We're going to start to put together the pieces of what has killed free speech tonight. And then we're going to talk about an article, but let's start here.
Hybrid warfare is one of those topics that are talked about a lot, but are hard to define. It's a fairly new term, but at the same time, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what about it that is new. After all, people have been using dirty tricks in war since the beginning of time. So what's the fuss? But in this video, I want to make it clear what hybrid warfare is, or at least I'm going to give the best answer that I have found. And I think it turns hybrid warfare into a much more practical concept to work with. Hybrid warfare means to wage war below the threshold of actual war fighting. So it's things like subversion, enticing uprisings, election meddling, misinformation, and so forth. The most famous.
So this is something we've talked about in the past on this channel, and I've alluded to quite readily. I talked extensively about Russia in 2016 and how they influenced and engaged with the American electorate through social media in order not to necessarily change people's votes or minds, but to try to influence certain people to vote and discourage others from voting. And you see a fairly significant level of sophistication here. We're talking about a fairly old concept, this tricky, sneaky a method of warfare. But this is something I think both different in its execution and different in how we relate to it. So like you get that particular story of the goth warlord who is pretending he's dying and wants to be baptized to get access to a Roman city, and they open the gates and he and his men come in and they sack the city. And like this is a dirty trick type thing that he's talking about, right? We're talking about something a little bit different. We're talking about a nature of warfare that is omnipresent in your world and therefore much more dangerous in a certain sense, but also something that's unavoidable. You have today, in most cases, we have smartphones with access to the internet, which access to social media, which gives us the ability to communicate with people all over the world. But more importantly, those social media companies have used you as a product. They've taken your data, your habits, your predilections, and they've said, we know what you are, what you believe in, what you want, and we can serve this information to advertisers who are tailored to things that you might buy. And that's how they make their money. This has obviously not been the only use of that data. We have used this extensively in elections. It's bought and sold by data brokers like Cambridge Analytica of the 2016 election infamy. And it's not simply used by domestic political parties. That information was shared by the Trump campaign with Russian agents, for example. And using that information, they were able to target messages to American voters. Hybrid warfare, in particular, and liminal warfare, these are semi interchangeable terms, but what they refer to, and I like the word liminal better, what they refer to is the space in between actual war with missiles and guns and bombs and bullets and not fighting a war. It's something that doesn't quite rise to the level and of response. And how this kind of works is a nation has a set of provocations. If you do certain things to a country, that country will respond. You want to find a way to influence or antagonize that country without that antagonism rising to the level that gets you a tomahawk missile up your tailpipe. Let's go ahead and continue.
This example is probably Russia's occupation of Crimea in the beginning of 2014. What happened was that the so-called little green men took over the peninsula without anyone really noticing what was going on before it was all over. Other examples that are often mentioned as hybrid warfare are the Russian meddling in the American presidential election in 2016 and the Brexit referendum.
It's probably worth
Here
noting,
they managed.
It's probably worth noting that both of these examples are not really acknowledged by the right wing of the countries in question. But really, what they accomplished in 2016 is really quite incredible. Let's go on.
To manipulate social media platforms like Facebook or Twitter, and they did it in a way that deepened the social fault lines in the American British societies. And this helped to radicalize the different political positions, and ultimately it can have moved the needle in the voting. Lately, there has been a lot of talk about refugees being weaponized in hybrid warfare operations, for example, by Belarus. And that's just a disgusting way to capitalize on human suffering. Hybrid warfare has often been connected to Russia. And I think that's because Russia had so much success with it in Ukraine. That was when we really started noticing how great military results can actually be achieved with these measures. But I don't want to make it sound as if Russia are the only ones doing this. Many countries have engaged.
Probably worth noting that almost every country is doing this, and not necessarily just to other countries. This is probably happening inside our country to us by Americans. And the methodology is pretty simple. It's very easy to run fake social media accounts. For example, in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, you saw people saying a whole slew of texts going onto Twitter, or tweets rather, going onto Twitter/X, wherein they said, as a lifelong Democrat, blah, 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 blah. And dozens of accounts saying identical things. And these are hybrid warfare attacks. They are liminal warfare attacks designed to fill your feed with people saying a specific thing. Dozens and dozens of accounts fired off by a single operator using a couple dozen phones, or people in warehouses firing off these from phones, using them to fill various feeds of Twitter with a message, so that you see the message and that you feel that that message is omnipresent and that it is there all around you. This is interfering with our ability to have an honest discussion with one another, because my ability to talk to you about a problem depends upon both of us coming at this in good faith. If our interaction is mediated by social media and we are talking to people who are not really people, who do not have stakes in these things in the way that you and I do, and whose only stake in it is to harm us, and we are seeing divisive messages, then you start to see where this problem is coming in. Because if you have this particular problem, then you can't communicate about your own issues, the issues confronting your communities, your society, and your country, because everyone is trying to fill that space with static and fake interactions. So now you are fighting shadows and boxing ghosts and getting into pointless online arguments, whereas before you might have been able to have a discussion.
In things that can be termed hybrid warfare. The problem when we talk about hybrid warfare is that this is not really a new thing. As long as humans have been fighting, we have been using dirty tricks. And as a concept in military thinking, it's not really new either. Like, for example, the American diplomat George Kennan wrote a famous telegram in 1946 where he described how the Soviet Union saw the world after the Second World War. And here he described what he termed Soviet policies on a subterranean plane. And that's basically hybrid warfare. The concept is also easy to recognize in ideas like the Soviet concept of reflexive control. So hybrid warfare is not really a new thing, and many people have criticized it for being a fancy buzzword that doesn't really have any meaning. And as these critics point out, no war in history has ever been fought without the use of hybrid tactics. It has also been suggested that other terms like political war or gray zone conflict may better express what's going on. And I think we can argue about these terms and what we want to call this phenomenon. I don't have a problem with the term hybrid warfare. It seems to be the term that most people use, and I'm happy to use.
Hi, Maya. Yes, last week Avery got sick. He's better now. He's having a good time building a blanket fort. No, we're here. I was saying prior to that, I think we're gonna launch our regular stream 9:30 Mountain Time. So theoretically, when your show ends,
Use it too, but we just need to be aware that other people may use different words for basically the same thing. And my take on it is that there is something new about hybrid warfare. With modern technology, we can coordinate much more effectively between the different instruments of national power. So there is something different about the scale compared to earlier. But at the very least, the theory about hybrid warfare is new. There is something here that we don't quite understand, and there are many discussions about what it means. So even if we think that hybrid warfare is an old concept, it's still relevant to think about it. And I think one of the most interesting theories is David Kilcullen's theory about liminal warfare.
David Kilcullen is a really good historian and author. I would highly recommend his book where he talks about liminal warfare. It's called The Dragons and the Snakes: How the Rest Learned to Fight the West. I don't think he came up with that title. I think his publisher did, or at least this part after the colon.
He introduced this theory in an article in the Scandinavian Journal of Military Studies, and he later expanded on it in his book, The Dragons and the Snakes. The article is free, so I'm going to add a link to it in the video description. So liminal warfare is yet another term for hybrid warfare, but Kilcullen prefers to talk about the liminal aspect rather than the hybrid one. But it basically covers the same thing.
So do I, incidentally.
Kilcullen's point is that the interesting thing is not so much that different tools are combined in a hybrid fashion, but rather that they are used in ways that take advantage of certain thresholds in the opponent's defensive systems. So the thresholds are the central.
I think a better way of explaining this is they take advantage of what a nation is willing to tolerate before it goes to war. So there is an article, and fuck me if I can find it any longer, that talks about what happened when Obama started to was informed of and the Russian interference in the 2016 election was being recognized. President Obama wanted to take action to try to inform people of the situation about Russia's interference in America's elections in 2016, and Mitch McConnell opposed this, primarily because the majority of Russian interference was an effort to help Donald Trump win. There was a threshold there. Obama was going to take action to expose what was happening, and a political pressure was used to stop that threshold from being exceeded. And what liminal warfare is like, it's the word liminal, the space in between. You want to find a way to interfere with a nation or a political party in such a way that does not bring down violence upon you. Like, so for example, if Russia comes and they drop a bomb on an American position in Germany as on an overflight, they're probably going to get themselves a Tomahawk missile up their tailpipe. But if they start spreading divisive social media messages to German kids or American and German kids who are on bases and in facilities, and they get them to have fights and struggle, and people start to question the validity of America's positions in Germany, that's liminal warfare, baby.
Element in Kilcullen's theory. The first one is a detection threshold. So this is the moment when the opponent notices that something is going on. Before the detection threshold, the operation was invisible. This is what Kilcullen calls the area for clandestine activities, where you can conduct operations that nobody has a clue about. But above the detection threshold, it is recognized that something is happening, and the opponent will start to investigate what it is. But even though they know that there is an operation going on, they still don't know who's behind it. So this is the area of covert operations, where the operation is detected, but the sponsor is unknown. This is the case until the next threshold, which is the attribution threshold. At this point, the opponent knows that.
So here is a point I would make about this with social media. It's very easy for us now to detect what's happening. It's very easy to see what's happening. It's harder to figure out who it is because there are an awful lot of countries that benefit from America chasing its own tail and Americans chasing their own tail. So when Charlie Kirk got shot, without attributing any necessary actor to the shooting of Charlie Kirk, because I know that can be a thing, it's not unreasonable to assume that those messages that says, as a lifelong Democrat, I think Charlie Kirk was swell, blah, 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 could have very well come from Russians. They could have come from Chinese agents. They could have come from Israeli agents. All three benefit from the growing ability of conservatives to persecute Americans. And so, with that in mind, and making Charlie Kirk into a hero and a martyr in the way that they can do, and this is helped along by American influencers, right? Who want this to happen even because it increases their own power and ability to make money. So there's this reinforcing cycle because we live in a algorithm mediated discourse space in social media. The algorithm encourages interaction. It rewards either high positive or negative feelings. So you get perverse incentives oftentimes much because it rewards negative interaction the same as positive interaction. And so if Benny Johnson says the same thing as 5 Russian agents in a hut in the middle of Siberia, and the exact same thing as 5 Israeli agents in a hut in the middle of Tel Aviv, then you have 11 people putting out 50 accounts saying the same thing, doing the same thing. And even if they're all 3 sets of people in different countries, they're all benefiting from it.
There is an operation, and they also know who's doing it, or at least they have a fairly good idea about who is doing it. But there may still be confusion, and there can be ambiguity that can be exploited. For example, data can be interpreted in different ways, and politicians can have doubts about how to respond. So that's the
Like Mitch McConnell.
last threshold, the response threshold. This is the moment when the opponent's politicians decide how to respond to the operation. At this point, when you reach the response threshold, the hybrid operation is over, and instead we have an open conflict. So the goal is to spend as much time as possible below the response threshold, not necessarily below.
The United States is getting its ass kicked in this arena, just utterly destroyed. We have no ability to respond once we reach the response threshold. We don't know how to respond. We don't. We aren't unified in any kind of way to respond. There isn't any kind of will to come up with a plan for Cybercom to have a response when these attacks take place. Because these attacks benefit immensely the American conservatives. And why do they do that? Because American conservatives are not that interested in America so much as they are interested in selling America for parts and taking it apart as they go. So there's no real will to do anything about this. I'm just going to come over here and play this part.
The interesting thing about Kilcullen's theory is not that some operations are clandestine and that others are overt. That's an old distinction. The new thing is that Kilcullen identifies a room for maneuver between the clandestine and the overt, and that's what he calls the liminal zone. And I think this creates a useful framework for talking about hybrid warfare where it becomes much more tangible. The last thing I want to touch on is the question of what determines the location of the thresholds, because
And I've already talked a little bit about that, and we'll kind of set that aside, and we're not going to steal all of Mr. Nielsen's video here tonight. Here is the problem that we are encountering with our ability to have free speech and have discourse that advances our nation and our personal progress, our personal civil rights. The problem is that speech is no longer about things that are real. Open measures And we're only going to go over the TLDR on this portion because we have a whole nother section for me to torture you with. And we're running up close to the hour mark, and this is only going to be about an hour and a half. Everyone remembers a couple weeks back, actually, I think it's about a month ago, when Sydney Sweeney's American Eagle jeans campaign came up, and people were insisting that Sydney Sweeney had offended the left. It turns out that Sydney Sweeney had not offended the left in any significant fashion. However, who is messaging me and why? Oh, it's Nick. However, a whole host of conservatives started repeating it over and over and over again, and it got picked up by media as this giant controversy. And I was left to ask a question, which is, when do mild, conventionally attractive, blonde white women with big boobs have become unpopular? Because apparently it was a horrific thing, and they were posting pictures of Sydney Sweeney in a bikini everywhere. And I'm like, I don't, and like this offends liberals, and I'm like, and leftists. I'm like, I'm not offended. I'm not offended by tits. Congratulations. So the TLDR, on July 23rd, 2025, a clothing company, American Eagle Outfitters, launched an advertising campaign featuring actress Sydney Sweeney, centered on a denim-themed pun about Sweeney's great genes, as in genetic genes. The ad drew the company into a social media outrage cycle. The cycle began several days after the ad debuted, when conservative political personalities on X amplified a small number of posts accusing American Eagle Outfitters of echoing racist tropes in the CARE campaign and asserting the ad had categorically outraged liberals. As news media outlets began to cover the purported outrage, often highlighting social media posts from random users, political leaders weighed in as well, further amplifying the narrative. So here we have random ass nobodies saying a thing and it being picked up as representative of the left. I talk about good faith. If somebody who is not a political leader gets up and says a thing, good for them. But should this be treated as representative of an entire class of people? And should this dictate the entire discussion? And the answer is no. If somebody who wants to say a thing wants to say a thing, go for it. But I shouldn't have to consider that thing as representative of all of those people, right? Open Measures Analysis affirmed prior reporting that online accusations of racism levied in American Eagle Great Genes pun had been fringe until conservative figures amplified them in an attempt to disparage their political enemies. These narratives are amplified more frequently and significantly by users on predominantly conservative alt platforms than by users elsewhere. Further posts about the ad with the terms related to political identities like liberal and conservative more frequently than terms related to the racist ideology. So the original actions of the posters mattered not at all. It mattered simply that they existed and could be used to simply further a narrative. Taken together, our analysis suggests that the majority of the vitriol surrounding the campaign centered not on the need to criticize the content of the ad itself, but to use the ad as a vehicle to criticize perceived political opponents. So the outrage was effectively not really real. The outrage was fostered, created, and manufactured in order to create a narrative. And truth didn't happen at all. No real discussion took place about racism. No one really had a discussion about blondes with big boobs. Well, some people did. But the problem is that this wasn't real. It consumed our national interest and our national attention and the limited attention we have, and it accomplished nothing. It was fluff. It was just nothing. And this happens all the time. I picked this particular example because it's visceral, but it happens all the time, and it's happening frequently in the Trump administration. We've had multiple reports of right-wing bloggers creating stories out of thin air about certain federal employees in order to get those federal employees fired, and it works because they tag the chief of staff and they tag Stephen Miller, and then the federal employee gets fired. And the ability to have the discussion at all has turned into having to wade through endless piles of bullshit. And this is the threat to free speech. We have weaponized social media and turned it into one of the most powerful weapons ever created. And we have weaponized it in such a way that it paralyzes us. It paralyzes our ability to exist, to function, and to debate in good faith with one another and to find solutions to our problems. We cannot continue like this. The idea behind speech has always been to be able to advance ideas that are unpopular if they need be considered. People died in 2020 because a fake campaign was made to try to get people not to wear masks. A fake campaign was made to get people to not take vaccines. People die because of this. And it is truly, truly horrifying. And I don't have an answer for you because on the surface, what I'm talking about is that we need to stop these kinds of things from happening. And it's not a small thing. It's not even really something that most people want to consider. You find free speech warriors like Wick TV. Oh, everything must be considered. All the time. The idea that we must allow offensive speech or lies is considered fundamental to free speech. And it is fundamental to the understanding of the free speech in the United States Constitution, or as elucidated by John Stuart Mill. But John Stuart Mill and the framers of the Constitution are not living in our times and are not facing our problems. And we are facing dangerous times. We've all seen what's happening with how the right is trying to frame Antifa as, and they've done this explicitly, as a group like Hamas or Hezbollah or the drug cartels. And they're doing this not because Antifa is a thing in that sense, but because they want to be able to have and a label ready to apply to someone that stands up to them in order to stomp them down. How do we have dialogue in this environment where you can't even have an honest discussion because there's no penalty for hypocrisy and there's no penalty for lying, and you can't act on your lie without real consequences? Does any kind of discourse exist in this environment? Any kind of meaningful discourse? Does free speech matter? Should we allow free speech to harm us in this way? What would John Stuart Mill say about his harm principle at this point? If the very nature of allowing the offensive speech and the lies to spread without consequence has caused us to be harmed, because we can no longer function as a society. If it is literally tearing our society apart, must we preserve it in this way? I don't have an answer for you. That's what I get to do, though. I get to raise questions and hope other people can think of them. The next thing I'm going to play for you is a cutscene, well, kind of, from Metal Gear Solid 2. Metal Gear Solid 2 came out in 2001 and so perfectly predicted the social media-induced hellscape we live in. And I'm going to play this without endorsing what it's suggesting or proposing, but to provide background before I launch into this. This is a fairly late game portion from Metal Gear Solid 2, where the idea of information control is being expounded upon to the player character.
I will triumph over the Patriots and liberate us all, and we will become The Sons of Liberty!
Raiden, are you receiving? We're still here.
How's that possible? The AI was destroyed.
Only GW.
Who are you?
To begin with, we're not what you'd call human. Over the past 200 years, a kind of consciousness formed layer by layer in the crucible of the White House. It's not unlike...
I should probably mention that this game is well known for being fucking nuts.
Like the way life started in the oceans 4 billion years ago. The White House was our primordial soup, a base of evolution. We are formless. We are the very discipline and morality that Americans invoke so often. How can anyone hope to eliminate us? As long as this nation exists, so will we.
Cut the crap! If you're immortal, why would you take away individual freedoms and censor the net?
Jack, don't be silly.
Don't you know that our plans have your interests, not ours, in mind?
What?
Jack, listen carefully, like a good boy.
The mapping of the human genome was completed early this century. As a result, the evolutionary log of the human race lay open to us.
We started with genetic engineering, and in the end, we succeeded in digitizing life itself.
But there are things not covered by genetic information.
What do you mean?
Human memories, ideas, culture, history.
Genes don't contain any record of human history.
Is it something that should not be passed on? Should that information be left at the mercy of nature?
We've always kept records of our lives, through words, pictures, symbols, from tablets to books.
But not all the information was inherited by later generations. A small percentage of the whole was selected and processed, then passed on. Not unlike genes, really.
That's what history is, Jack.
But in the current digitized world, trivial information is accumulating every second, preserved in all its triteness, never fading, always accessible.
Rumors about petty issues, misinterpretations, slander.
All this junk data, preserved in an unfiltered state, growing at an alarming rate.
It will only slow down social progress, reduce the rate of evolution.
Right. You seem to think that our plan is one of censorship.
Are you telling me it's not?
You're being silly. What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Create context.
The digital society furthers human flaws and selectively rewards development of convenient half-truths.
It's almost like he knew social media was going to happen. I actually did some looking into this. Around 2001, it actually was released a few days after 9/11. But around 2001, there were some rudimentary social media networks that existed, but MySpace wasn't going to get big for a while yet, and Facebook was still 6 years off. But this idea that we're going to start talking about next, this is really the meat of what I want to talk about, is very on point to how digital media and social media have affected how we communicate with one another and what we see as real and true.
Just look at the strange juxtapositions of morality around you.
Billions spent on new weapons in order to humanely murder other humans.
Rights of criminals are given more respect than the privacy of their victims.
Although there are people suffering in poverty, huge donations are made to protect endangered species. Everyone grows up being told the same thing.
Be nice to other people.
But beat out the competition.
You're special. Believe in yourself and you will succeed.
But it's obvious from the start that only a few can succeed.
You exercise your right to freedom, and this is the result. All rhetoric to avoid conflict and protect each other from hurt. The untested truths, spun by different interests, continue to churn and accumulate in the sandbox of political correctness and value systems.
Everyone withdraws into their own small gated community, afraid of a larger forum. They stay inside their little ponds, leaking whatever truth suits them into the growing cesspool of society at large.
The different cardinal truths neither clash nor mesh. No one is invalidated, but nobody is right.
Not even natural selection can take place here. The world is being engulfed in truth.
And this is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper.
We're trying to stop that from happening.
It's our responsibility.
And so here I kind of want to interrupt again. Sorry. This is what I'm talking about largely, or at least attempting to, and why I'm playing this so that we can kind of have that part of the discussion. I am not endorsing this scheme of control, but what I am want to point out is that this idea that the inability to regulate what is false causes bad information to pile up is important.
As rulers. Just as in genetics, unnecessary information and memory must be filtered out to stimulate the evolution of the species.
And you think you're qualified to decide what's necessary and not?
Absolutely. Who else could wade through the sea of garbage you people produce, retrieve valuable truths, and even interpret their meaning for later generations?
That's what it means to create context.
I'll decide for myself what to believe and what to pass on.
But is that even your own idea?
Or something Snake told you.
That's the proof of your incompetence right there. You lack the qualifications to exercise free will.
That's not true. I have the right.
Does something like a self exist inside of you?
That which you call self serves as nothing more than a mask to cover your own being.
In this era of ready-made truths, self is just something used to preserve those positive emotions that you occasionally feel.
Another possibility is that self is a concept you conveniently borrowed under the logic that would endow you with some sense of strength.
That's crap!
Is it? Would you prefer that someone else tell you? All right then. Explain it to him.
Jack, you're simply the best, and you got there all by yourself.
Oh, what happened? Do you feel lost? Why not try a bit of soul searching?
Don't think you'll find anything, though.
Ironic that although self is something that you yourself fashioned, every time something goes wrong, you turn around and place the blame on something else.
It's not my fault. It's not your fault.
In denial, you simply resort to looking for another, more convenient truth in order to make yourself feel better.
Leaving behind in an instant the so-called truth you once embraced.
Should someone like that be able to decide what is truth?
Should someone like you even have the right to decide?
You've done nothing but abuse your freedom.
You don't deserve to be free.
We're not the ones smothering the world. You are.
The individual is supposed to be weak, but far from powerless. A single person has the potential to ruin the world.
And the age of digitized communication has given even more power to the individual. Too much power for an immature species.
Building a legacy involves figuring out what is wanted and what needs to be done for that goal. All this you use.
Yeah, Aerodyne, there are definitely some echoes of certain Nietzschean aspects here, but not overall, no.
To struggle with. Now we think for you.
We are your guardians, after all.
You want to control human thought? Human behavior?
Of course. Anything can be quantified nowadays. That's what this exercise was designed to prove.
You fell in love with me just as you were meant to, after all. Isn't that right, Jack?
Ocelot was not told the whole truth, to say the least.
We rule an entire nation. Of what interest would a single soldier, no matter how able, be to us?
The S3 plan does not stand for solid snake simulation. What it does stand for is selection for societal sanity. The S3 is a system for controlling human will and consciousness. S3 is not you, a soldier trained in the image of Solid Snake.
All right. this is the thrust of what we wanted to get to tonight. The idea at play here is less about what S3 is, and that is a fascinating topic which I will turn into a bad video essay later. The idea is talking about how do we communicate with one another in an era where communication is being deliberately destroyed. I don't have answers to that question, but I think it's worth mentioning that Donald Trump doesn't have to kill freedom of speech by banning flag burning or by creating a pretext through Antifa. This problem is already there. The inability to communicate honestly, frankly, and to advance our will and to solve problems is gone. We killed free speech. And we've got to create something better if we're going to survive. That's it for tonight, guys. Thanks for coming out. Stay safe.